Welcome to this exercise walkthrough. Now, the script you're going to write today is very closely based on the previous script you wrote. As a matter of fact, we don't have to do any new coding if we don't want to. You can simply update that existing script to conform to the new requirements that you have now. And speaking of those new requirements, the help desk in our scenario has been using your script, and they notice that there's some extra output that they don't need, that they don't care to see. It really doesn't make any sense to them. So they want you to make that output disappear. And of course, you know that output comes from the password command, passwd, and that you're going to have to use IO redirection to redirect that output to the null device. And so you start to think about what else you can do to this script with IO redirection, and you come up with that you could actually conform to standard conventions, standard Linux programming conventions, by redirecting error messages to standard error and so on. So with that in mind, let's look at just a couple of changes that we're going to make with this script. So we're going to change the name of the script from add new local user to add newer local user. Now, in the real world, I wouldn't necessarily change the name. I would just make these couple of updates to that script in place, of course, test it first and then put it into production. However, just for the sake of distinguishing what exercise and what script you're working on, if you need help and so on, I'm just going to use a new name here so that we just get a unique script for each exercise that we're working on. So again, in the real world, you can keep the same name if you'd like. Now, really all the other requirements are still in play, like you want to make sure that the script is run with super user privileges, but the only difference there is that when you display some help or an error message when they don't, then what you want to do is send that output to standard error instead of standard output like we've been doing. And that's going to be the same thing for all the error statuses that we're going to display in our script. So that's really the main thing that we're going to be changing here. So here I am on my local system with my terminal open, and I'm going to navigate to the class folder. From here, I'm going to navigate to the Vagrant project that we're using for this set of scripts, and that's local users. And then I'm going to bring this virtual machine up and then connect to it. Now I'm going to move into the shared folder of /Vagrant. And then here I'm actually going to copy the previous script we used and just copy it to this new name that we're going to work on today. Of course, you can write this entire script from scratch again if you would like, just to give yourself some extra practice. But here for the walkthrough, I'm just going to show you the couple of changes that you need to make from the previous script in order to conform to these new requirements that we've come up with here. So what I'm going to do is just start at the very top of the script and work my way down, looking for any changes that I need to make. So here I see an exit status of 1 and an echo statement previously before it. So that's really our error message when we're exiting with a 1. So what we need to do is send this output from the echo command to standard error. Right now, by default, it's going to be displayed to standard output. And so we can do this with a greater than symbol, an ampersand, and 2. Now realize here that the greater than symbol assumes standard output. So it's also the same as this if we want to be explicit and specify file descriptor 1 for standard output. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to delete that and then use this syntax, the greater than ampersand 2. And of course, as you know, an ampersand right after a redirection operator implies that you're using a file descriptor instead of a file name. So again, file descriptor 2 is associated with standard error. So that makes the standard output here, the echo would generate, be displayed on standard error. Going to keep working my way down here. Here I come to another exit statement here, and I'm just going to do the same thing. We're just going to send all this output to standard error. Going to redraw my screen with a cursor at the top and then just keep on working down here. So assigning variables is not going to cause any output. The shift command won't either. The output of this command is stored in a variable, so it's not getting displayed anywhere. Okay, this is a command that could possibly generate output. Now let me go down in the script a little bit here. You can see that we're actually checking for its exit status down here. So we don't necessarily need to see the output generated by this command. So actually what I'm going to do here is ignore all the output. I don't need to see the standard output or the standard error from this command. So to redirect both standard output and standard error, we'll use ampersand greater than sign, and then we're going to send that to the dev null device, and that's just going to throw away anything that it gets. So all the output generated by this command will not be displayed to the user running the script. Again, we come to another exit statement, and that means this echo command right above it is going to be an error message. So we're going to send this to standard error. Okay, so this password command we know generates some output. So what we want to do is, send that output to dev null so that the user doesn't see this output. So again, we're going to use ampersand greater than and send that to the dev null device. We're doing a check for an exit status of the password command, and then we're going to display an error if we get an error. So that means this is an error message and needs to be displayed on standard error. Now we have another password command. Again, the help desk users don't want to see these messages, so we're just going to send all that output to dev null. Since we haven't generated any output in our script here, there's no need for a blank line to separate the information that we're going to display for the user between the output of the previous command. So I'm just going to get rid of this echo statement. And then the rest of our script here generates the output that we want the user to see. So let's go ahead and save our changes. And then we'll check the permissions on the script. Now, when you copy a script, it gets the same permissions as the script it was copied from, but we'll go ahead and check the permissions here just to be thorough. Okay, it's 755, so that looks good. You can see the X's there in all three sets of permissions, so anyone can execute this script. Now, obviously, if they don't run it with sudo privileges, they're going to get an error message, but again, the executable bit is there. If you created this script from scratch, then you're going to need to chmod 755 your script. So now that we have our changes in place or our new script written, let's go ahead and test it. So let's add a new user here, and we'll just call this username Turing, and the comment will be Alan Turing, and hit enter. So now you can see that the only thing is displayed is the username, the password, and the host that this user was created on. None of that extra output from the password commands were displayed on the screen, and this is exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and create our other users here. We have was. Again, the display is just the information that is needed by the people running the command. We'll create another user here. Call this Moore for Gordon Moore. Okay, we've created 3 accounts. Now let's go ahead and see if those accounts were added to the Etsy password file. We can do that by just telling the Etsy password file, or actually I'm going to do a -3 for the last 3 lines of the Etsy password file. Okay, there you can see our users, Turing, was, and Moore. Now I'm just going to switch to an account to be thorough here to make sure that it still forces the password expiration and prompts us for a new password on login. As a matter of fact, before I do this, I need to go back up here and actually copy the password. Okay. It's asking for a current password and then a new password. Okay, that looks like it worked, and we're all done with this user. So we'll just hit exit here and return to our normal Vagrant user. So the core functionality of our script is still in place. It creates users, it expires their passwords, and so on. So now what we want to do is actually test our new functionality. So one way to do that is to make our script generate an error, and we can do that by not running it with super user privileges. Okay, we get a message on our screen. Of course, you can't tell if that message is standard input or standard output, but we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, it prints a message to our screen. Now let's check the exit status of the command. Sure enough, it's an exit status of 1, which is exactly what we want. Now let's do the same thing again, but this time let's redirect the standard output and standard error to different places and then check those to see what is going where. Now, because by default, standard output and standard error are both displayed to our screen, we can't necessarily tell what's standard output or standard error just by looking. So what we're going to do is redirect standard output to a file called stdout. We can name that anything. I'm just going to use the kind of standard abbreviation here. Again, standard error is going to go to a file I'm just going to name std.err. Again, you can name it any file name you want. So all the output either goes to standard out or standard error. So let's examine the standard out file. And there's nothing in that file. And if we look at standard error, then our error message is in that file. So we know that the echo statement is displaying its output to standard error. And that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and remove these files. Let's test for another error condition that our script checks for. We'll actually run the script here, but we won't supply any arguments. So we'll hit enter, and sure enough, we get an exit status here of 1. And now let's run the same kind of test. We'll just send the standard output to standard out and the standard error to a standard error file. We'll look to see if it generated any standard output. It did not. So all the error messages went to standard error, and that's exactly what we want our script to do. I'm going to go ahead and clean up here. All right, now that brings us to the end of this exercise. So we've made our changes. Our error messages are now being displayed to standard error instead of standard out. And all that output that was generated from those other commands are now hidden from the user. Since I'm done for the day, I'm going to exit out of the virtual machine and then go ahead and halt it.